The augment and trait system in Xenoblade Chronicles X is one of the most in-depth customization features out there, with a wide variety of ways to increase your combat abilities and min-max your stats to do some truly incredible damage and just have a lot of fun with the game. It is one of my favorite customization features in RPGs, period, and understanding all of the various different types of augments and traits can allow you to craft some very solid and fun builds. In today's video, I want to go through exactly that. I want to talk about all the potential different augment and gear traits, for ground combat at least, since skulls will likely be a different video, talk about which augments are the best to craft, show the most efficient ways to farm for augments, including a quick note about Frontier Nav, and offer some general tips of how to set up your builds for the most success. This guide should be useful for both people playing through the story and post-game players alike, as there are different augment tiers, and generally lower tiers of augments are going to be much easier to craft for most players. If you enjoy guide content like this for Xenoblade Chronicles X and would like to see more, including weapon guides, a guide to finding and farming the best weapons and gear, skill guides, and more, do be sure to subscribe to the channel because it does help me out so much. I'm getting pretty close to 100,000 subscribers and would really love to hit that milestone. Now let's get started. So before going entirely into augments, let's talk briefly about gear and weapon traits. So essentially on every piece of gear you have, you will see at the bottom of the stats of that gear an additional effects tab. Essentially, these are your weapon traits, and most weapon and gear can have up to 3 of these traits. Now the reason I bring these up is that because all of the possible traits that gear can have is basically just from the pool of potential augments. Whereas traits are specific to weapons and gears, augments are near fully customizable effects that you can add to the gear and change out whenever simply by pressing ZL on the menu screen. Typically, every piece of gear in the game has a small pool of different possible traits it can possibly have, and this will typically mean a lot of gear that can have more useful traits ends up being better than gear that cannot. Sometimes even the final tier of shop gear will be better than post-game gear you can farm simply because they might have unique traits that cannot be obtained on other pieces of gear of that slot, such as potential up for candid incredible shop gear. Some gear may even have unique traits you cannot normally get anywhere else, such as Appendage Crusher being available on eye patch armor when normally it's only something you can put on your weapons. Compared to this, augments are pretty much entirely customizable outside of the fact that augments are divided into weapon augments and armor augments. Weapon augments cannot be equipped to armor slots and vice versa. This means some builds can work better or worse depending on if it's competing for augment slots. Each of your 2 weapons can have 3 weapon augment slots each, and each armor slot can have 1 augment slot each. And this applies for every piece of gear. If a piece of gear does not currently have this amount of slots, you can use L Shop to unlock the slot for that weapon or armor for some uranium. As far as augments are concerned, you should be able to use the AM terminal on Armory Alley to craft augments, and this is something you should probably be doing even if you are just playing through the game, because you can get a number of very beneficial effects that you can put on your gear that will make your life playing this game much easier. Now for each of these augments, you're going to need materials to craft them. Typically this will be a mix of enemy drops and 1 Frontier Nav precious resource drop. The strongest augment tier is level 20, which will usually require the most materials to craft, while you can get discount versions of the builds you want, such as level 10 augments, for much cheaper. Now this game is much nicer than the original Xenoblade X. There are a lot of features in this game that make this process significantly easier. For one, basically everything is much cheaper. Level 20 augments are basically half the cost they used to be, meaning you only need half of the materials. In addition, there is a tracking feature in this game that will show you exactly where the enemy that drops the material is on the map. Simply set the augment you want to craft to tracking to find those enemies. Additionally, from everything I can tell, drop rates also seem improved in this game, where it is much easier to get more materials when killing enemies this time around, especially when you break appendages. This means that overall, it is much easier to gather most materials to craft strong augments in this game. I should also mention the treasure sensor trait / augment, which increases drop rates up to 100%. This is additive to the party, so as long as your party can hit 100% between all of their gear, you have the full effect. Just having the candid incredible shop gear of the last tier on your 3 AI can reach over 90%, I believe, so you can take them farming with you. Alternatively, if you have online features, you can also scout my cross, as I currently have 80% treasure sensor augments equipped, along with a strong melee attack build that can easily kill most enemies you may need to farm for the materials. This can make your life a lot easier as well. This may not always be applicable, as my build may update eventually, but for now I'll try to keep it like this as much as I can. If you'd like to scout me, feel free to use the in-game follow feature by going to the top scouted leaderboard, pressing follow player, then you can use the scout console to sort by followed players to easily find me. I may be a bit expensive though if you're early on in the game. Speaking of online features, the other way to get materials to craft gear is by spending a resource called tickets on the materials. Under the rewards tab of the online tab, you have access to the material market, which can allow you to buy whatever materials you may need if you have enough. Tickets can be obtained from completing online squad tasks and squad missions. They can also be obtained from selling the drops you get from killing nemesis appendages, but that is limited to 10 this time around in this game. You do not have infinite attempts, so you cannot rely on that method 100% of the time this time around. They aren't quite as easy to obtain in this game compared to the previous game because of that, but they are still not too bad if you're really struggling with enemy drop rates or aren't at the point where you can kill a certain enemy yet. The console inside the Blade Barracks always has updating missions you can take for tickets, which is really nice this time around, since in the previous game you couldn't do that either. Speaking of farming, we need to talk about the precious resources required for crafting augments. Now, as mentioned, in addition to monster drops, there is also usually a precious resource required for augments, and this can easily be the most annoying part of the process, since it is based on a timer of how much you have been playing. Especially because most of the strongest augments in the game want one specific resource called Bongelium. This resource is Cauldros exclusive, and unironically, even if you are just playing through the game right now, it cannot hurt to go ahead and make sure you put strong mining probes basically everywhere that drops this resource in Cauldros. You want as much of this as possible to make your life easier. Yes, you can set up Frontier Nav for better Moranium farming, but you should probably prioritize this more in my opinion, since you can always complete support missions in the Blade Barracks for Moranium very easily. There is exactly one way to get Bongelium outside of Frontier Nav drops, and that is the Hidden Conductors Squad mission. Now, in order to unlock this squad mission, you're going to need to constantly hop squads until you find a squad that currently has the mission called Air Raid available. Completing this mission while gathering the collectible in the middle of the map will unlock the Hidden Conductors mission, which is the only other way to have anything that can possibly drop Bongelium if you don't feel like waiting for Frontier Nav. Squad task and mission being unlinked in this game is very nice, since you can always keep squad hopping until you find these missions, and you don't have to complete the squad tasks before the missions unlock. As one further note before we talk about the augments themselves, you can dismantle augments in this game to get the full refund of the materials used, which is a very nice quality of life feature that can give you your Bongelium back if you want to go a different build path and are low on resources. Plus the other materials too if they happen to be used for something else that you want. Now let's finally talk about the augments and how you can build your augments for the most success. So, if we go to Engineer Augments, you are going to see an absolutely massive amount of augments available to you for both your weapon and your armor. And your skull, but we'll talk about those a little bit later in a different video, most likely. Now, regardless, there are so many options available to you, so how do you know which ones are good? Well, I'm going to be going through all of them with you and showing you some potential different build options for the ones that are good, and then I'll have a general overview of the absolute best augments to focus on and craft at the end of the video. So let's go ahead and get started here. Starting things off, we have the stat augments. Melee accuracy and ranged accuracy up. These have a couple niche uses if you do not have the ability to hit the enemy, where you can just kind of increase your accuracy by a static and set amount. Now, typically, you're probably just going to want to use night vision instead, because that's just a more general, universal boost to absolutely everything, and you don't have to worry about melee accuracy boost, ranged accuracy boost, and melee accuracy up and ranged accuracy up pretty much at all if you have that. And there are also auras and other things that can increase your accuracy, which will help make things a lot easier. Melee attack and ranged attack up are two of the best augments in the entire game. They are very, very expensive augments though, but you will get a very massive increase to your melee and ranged attack, which will increase the damage of all of your normal melee arts and all of your normal ranged arts, depending. Now, your TP arts are affected by the potential stat instead, so it's not going to work on those, but regardless, these are still very good if you want to go a melee attack or ranged attack build. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that potential is an armor augment, while ranged and melee attack are weapon augments. This usually means that melee and ranged attack builds and potential builds can be two entirely different types of builds, since they are not competing for slots with each other. You can have a number of numerous support effects or different types of effect on your weapon if you're running a potential build, and you can have numerous different effects on your armor if you're running a melee or ranged attack build. And now finally, we have melee attack boost and ranged attack boost. Typically, you're only going to want one or two of these simply because they are percentage boosts, so having the raw stats is going to be better to make the percentage more impactful later on, right? But regardless, those are pretty good augments as well. Next, we have the weapon mod augments. These can be somewhat useful depending. Weapon attack power up is usually only going to be good on really, really strong weapons that have really high weapon attack power already, like the Receding Rust, which has 444 weapon attack power. A lot of weapons just don't have the weapon attack power to make this the most impactful, so you're better stacking ranged and melee attack up to increase your total damage over this. But there are some weapons where this can be somewhat useful, so it really just depends. But regardless, a bit more niche than just general melee and ranged attack up. Stabilizer and Destabilizer are pretty much completely worthless because you're going to get the same average damage regardless. Maybe you can run Destabilizer if you really want to try to get a higher number with one of your weapons, but this is really just kind of worthless overall, and that's why even the level 5 or level 20 version of these are pretty much really cheap and worthless. Magazine capacity up, not really useful at all for the most part. There was like one small situation where it might have been useful with the ramjet rifle for memes, but that was kind of nerfed in this game anyway, so it doesn't really matter at all anymore. We have melee TP gain up and range TP gain up. These are also pretty worthless overall, in my opinion. You don't really need the extra TP gain from melee auto attacks or ranged auto attacks at all, so don't run these, don't even worry about them. Cooldown reducer, complete meme. You don't need auto attack cooldown. It's a really small source of your damage. Absolute meme. You don't need this at all. Firing range up. This has somewhat niche uses in time attack mode where you're trying to kill an enemy as fast as possible, and you have other ways to boost your damage to make this possible, so you just kind of run to the enemy and use your really long range weapon to kill the enemy. But outside of that, if you're doing general content, you don't really need to worry about this at all. But if you want to do time attack runs, this is something you might want to invest in. Then we have the critical augments. These aren't really that impactful, especially now that you can hit level 99. Critical chance in this game, just in general, critical damage is not a separate multiplier like it is in Xenoblade 2 and 3. It's just another additive source of damage, so in that sense, they're not as impactful here, and you're not going to need to run an augment slot on these. Now, these can be useful effects if they're just a general trait on the weapon, but if they, as an augment slot, you're usually going to want to prioritize something else entirely, so I would not worry about this at all. Enemy exploit augments. Now, typically, these have a 50% damage boost, and that's not necessarily bad, and they can have somewhat niche uses if you have nothing else to run in this slot. Like, in some cases, it could be better than melee or ranged attack up if you're trying to boost your general damage entirely, like if you're running a potential build instead of a melee and ranged attack build, and you want to just kind of generally boost your damage. But the problem with the Slayer augments here, with the enemy exploit augments, is that you have attack augments. And this is just going to be universally more useful because it's going to be the exact same percentage boost for the highest tier. Like Ether attack up just boosts all of your Ether damage by 50%. So if you're running an Ether weapon, you're going to get that 50% boost regardless, and it's going to be much more useful than just having the Slayer augments, which are also just 50% boost, but only for one type of enemy. Now, the Slayer effects are useful once again as weapon traits if you're able to have them on a weapon that can only have that type of trait over something like Ether attack. But otherwise, it's going to be better to just craft the general weapon augment depending on the weapon that you are using like this. Outside of that, we have back attack plus, side attack plus, vantage attack plus, and front attack plus. These are just positionals, but these are not actually that large of multipliers in this game. It's only a 25% bonus. So once again, I recommend just sticking to the weapon mods that increase your elemental damage, especially Ether, because that's going to be the strongest element in the game, thanks to the Core Crusher skill, increasing Ether damage by an absolutely massive amount. So I would not worry about these at all. Plus, when are you going to be able to attack from above that often? You also have melee blackout, melee fatigue, melee physical resistance down. Basically, melee applying basically all of these different debuffs here. These are very, very niche. There might be some situations where you might want to have a higher chance of inflicting a specific debuff to an enemy up to a level 4 debuff when auto-attacking, but it's not going to be super often. The good news is they are fairly cheap, so if you do want to just have one, they aren't too expensive to craft at the very least. Otherwise, I recommend just kind of ignoring these because they're probably not going to be that useful. Ether res down, melee ether res down, probably going to be the most useful for general builds that use ether weapons at the very least, so you might want to maybe invest in just one of those. Then we have melee recover HP. This is not really that useful. You don't really need to recover HP with melee auto-attacking because there are other ways to restore your HP in this game, like landing soul voices and having a lot of potential in landing soul voices with that, and there's a lot of ways just to not get hit in general. We have soft touch, a chance of not waking a sleeping enemy with attacking, pretty much worthless for most part. And then we have the nullify reflects. These have some niche uses, especially once again nullify ether reflect, especially because if you're using an ether weapon, you do not want to just one-shot yourself by attacking an enemy that reflects your ether attacks. The other reflects are less useful, but if you don't want to use an ether weapon, or if you have some purpose for not using an ether weapon, it still doesn't hurt to just craft one of each just to have them on hand. Because some enemies do have reflect, and they do reflect certain elements. Then we have the overdrive augments. Now, overdrive blue bonus and overdrive green bonus are pretty much worthless, not really worth having at all, but overdrive count up can actually be a pretty useful augment to have if you're running a potential build especially, and you don't have anything else to put in your weapon augment slots. This will essentially boost your overdrive when you overdrive count when you activate overdrive, meaning if you have a certain amount of these, you are actually able to hit max overdrive very, very easily. Just running 2 of these can give you 40 overdrive count at once, and if you're able to activate overdrive twice in a row from having 6,000 TP, you're able to just instantly get to 80 count. It's possible to get to max count by using this as well, which I did sometimes in the previous game when running potential builds. So this is definitely a pretty solid, useful augment to have. Go ahead and farm up some of these. They're pretty cheap as well, outside of the Bongelium. The other materials, at least, are fairly cheap. Art mod augments. We've got Arts Gain TP. This one is kind of a meme. I would definitely not spend all of the required materials just to gain 200 TP per art, because if you know how to use overdrive, there are significantly better ways to restore TP during overdrive, and this is just kind of a wasted slot when you can use it on general damage increases or anything else, honestly, that'll be vastly more useful. I can only recommend this if you're not good at the game and just really need to keep overdrive easier. We have Arts Recover HP, complete meme, don't even consider that. Secondary cooldown reducer, though, this one is actually pretty good. So the secondary cooldown reducer is a pretty strong augment, in my opinion. It is able to reduce your secondary cooldowns up to 100% if you're running 5 of them total, and you don't even need a secondary accelerator with a skill for that either. So you're able to replace that with a different skill slot, and you're able to basically instantly charge arts with certain builds, which can be really, really nice. So secondary cooldown reducer, definitely a pretty useful augment to have. Like I said, with 5 of them, you get the absolute maximum effect of just 100% secondary cooldown reduction, which is super, super nice to have. Very good augment, I should say. Then we have Extend Blaze, Extend Shock, Extend basically all of these debuffs. Useless, don't even worry about these. You have other ways you can apply debuffs, and you can just keep applying them really easily in overdrive with the resistance reduction of enemies. Opening Art, this is niche, once again, for time attacks, basically. If you are going for time attack strategies, you would craft some Opening Art damage ups to do as much damage as you can with your initial art to just kind of one-shot the enemy as fast as you can. Otherwise, I cannot really recommend this at all, but if you are planning to do time attack strategies, this is somewhat useful. After that, we have Soul Voice augments. These are pretty much all useless. There is no real reason to run any of these over any other weapon traits that you might have. Maybe it's okay if you just have it as an innate weapon trait, but as an augment, do not run these at all. You get Soul Voices very, very easily in overdrive. This is not worth it. The activation rate is not low enough to even worry about that. And then we have special augments. Appendage Crusher. This is one of the absolute best augments in the entire game, and it is extremely cheap. Everyone should get 5 of these. Everyone should get 5 of these, because there are certain enemies that you will get a ton of benefit out of having this. The way this works is that when you target an enemy appendage, it will soften that appendage by 1 tier. Basically, this is going to reduce the amount of defense the enemy has while you are targeting the appendage. And this is an independent multiplier to basically every other type of damage, and it is really, really strong. So essentially, enemy appendages can be all the way to -5 as far as their hardness tier is concerned. So if you target the right appendage with enough appendage crushers, you are able to do a massive amount of damage to enemies. Now, some appendages already start at a hardness tier of like -3 or -4, so you only need like 1 or 2 appendage crushers in order to hit that maximum value. But at the same time, this is extremely, extremely useful to just craft 5 of, because if you have them equipped, you're able to do a lot of additional damage to enemies. And honestly, this is something you could easily have equipped to your gear the entire game, just because of how generally useful and important it is. Now, if you are fighting an enemy that has a low appendage tier already, you only have to run a couple of these, and you're able to run melee and ranged attack up. And once again, I mentioned that the eye patch automatically has one of these built into it to save on your melee weapon slots if you need to run melee and ranged attack up or something else in these slots. But regardless, Appendage Crusher is one of the best augments in the entire game. Like I said, independent multiplier to all damage, really strong when combined with Core Crusher because you won't break the appendages when you're targeting them. Really strong damage boost overall. Very, very nice to have. Crush Gain TP, not really that useful since you don't really want to be destroying appendages when you are trying to do as much damage as possible. Ranged appendage damage, not really that useful either. And then Night Vision has a couple niche uses to increase your accuracy to just kind of hit some really evasive enemies if you don't have a way to do that with your current setup and gear. But this is really, really situation specific and otherwise not worth running. Next up, we have the armor augments. So we have the armor augments now. All of the stuff we just discussed can only be equipped to weapons, but we have armor augments now that we can equip to our armor, and these have different stats and different effects now. So the armor augments that we have are Boost Max HP, pretty much worthless. I would never really consider running this. Maximum TP up, though. You can definitely run a few of these because they are really, really cheap. Really easy to craft and very useful throughout the game as you are playing through it for the first time. I would 100% recommending grabbing some of these because if you're able to increase your maximum TP, you have a much larger leeway for using overdrive, and just have much more leeway in general for TP arts and just kind of understanding the systems as you are learning them and going through it. And just in general, having more TP just gives you a higher resource meter, which can be very useful to have. So really highly recommended Aux Score for me, especially for new players that don't know what they're doing yet. Evasion up, not really that useful in this game since you have ways to get guaranteed evasion and ways to just kind of take no damage from enemies if you know what you're doing. Potential up, one of the absolute best augments in the entire game. Boosting your potential is really, really strong in this game because potential is what increases your TP art damage, which is one of the best sources of damage in the game. TP arts are usually really, really strong and have really high scaling. And just in general, potential up is one of the best stats in the game for TP-based builds. When you are running potential builds, you might want to try to get max TP up on one of your weapon traits, so you don't have to run an augment on it. A lot of post-game gear does have max TP up on it, so you're able to kind of run those while not having to really sacrifice your potential, which can be really nice to have. Potential boost is a similar story to melee attack boost. It's a more percentage boost, so you want to run the potential ups before you really get the most benefit out of this, as the percentage multiplier will do a lot more once you have a set amount of potential up, right? So that's still a really nice one to have. The other stats up, but evasion boost max, TP boost max, HP boost, these are not really that useful at all. It's better to just run max TP up over max TP boost in pretty much all situations. Since if you're running max TP boost to get an actual effect out of it, you probably have too much max TP up at that point, and you don't really need that much, right? Then we have Scale Augments, not really that useful if you're doing ground combat at all, so I wouldn't really worry about these at all. Not really a major concern. Attribute Resistance Augments. These can have somewhat niche uses if you really want to hit like 100% resistance, so you don't take a certain damage type if you're fighting a certain enemy or doing a very specific type of build, or just trying to mess around with these systems. These, like, it can be okay. Like I said, if you ever max out 100% resistance, you take 1 damage from all attacks from an enemy, and they aren't like super expensive either. So these can be somewhat nice to have if you really just want to get that 100% resistance and just kind of mess around with certain enemies or do really highly specific builds. But outside of that, not really worth it for general builds. Then we have debuff resistance augments. Resist flinch has a couple niche uses, I think, in time attack as well, so you don't flinch when you're trying to attack enemies. Some of these might have some other niche uses outside of that, and I don't think they're super expensive. So these may not be the worst things to run, but I don't really think they're going to be the most useful for most general builds. Then we have anti-damage augments. Not really good at all. I wouldn't run any of these. Overdrive augments. Now, overdrive recover HP, pretty much worthless. I wouldn't really ever consider this. Extend overdrive, also not really useful at all, since you should be able to really easily extend overdrive without too much effort if you know what you are doing. Plus, overdrive gain TP can solve that problem for you. Overdrive gain TP is actually one of the best augments in the entire game. So, overdrive gain TP. What this does is boost your TP by 500 when you activate overdrive, and it is not super expensive as well outside of the Bongelium. Now, this doesn't seem amazing at first glance, but if you're running certain melee attack and ranged attack builds and you don't need the potential stat at all, you can run 5 of these on your gear, right? If you run 5 of these on your gear, you're going to get 2,500 TP, right? Every time you activate overdrive. There is a skill called Grand Procession at the end of the Duelist class line that also grants you 500 TP when you activate overdrive, and also grants 500 TP to your party, which can also is a really nice bonus effect of that. So, what I'm saying here is if you have 5 of these augments equipped and have that skill equipped, you will gain 3,000 TP every time you activate overdrive. Overdrive costs 3,000 TP. Congratulations, you have just made overdrive completely free of cost. Running this with something like Phantom Counter means you can easily max out overdrive just by spamming the A button, and this is really nice for melee attack builds and ranged attack builds, like I said, where you don't have to run appendage crushers, because you're going to be able to just immediately max out your overdrive and immediately do a bunch of damage, and you have the ability to just also restore TP to your entire party by doing this as well. It is a really nice build option, really useful to have, and also gives you a ton of duration, which means you'll never run out of overdrive duration. And all you have to have is 3,000 TP at the start of the fight. One of the absolute best augments in the entire game. One of the best things to focus on if you're building things early on and just trying to get the grasp of everything. This is a really, really good augment to consider getting a lot of very early on. Next up, we have Art Mod Augments. These aren't really the most useful outside of Aura Rapid Cooldown. I wouldn't really worry about ever extending your debuff effects with these out here, and you don't really ever need to extend Aura effects as well. It's really easy to just kind of get Aura effects back by just using the art again, right? Or using Combat Limbo or something like that. You especially don't need Aura Refuel, because why would you ever need that? Aura Rapid Cooldown, though, is one of the absolute best arts in the entire game. This one is extremely useful. If you have 5 of these, you have 100% cooldown reduction on your art while you have an aura active, and this is very, very easy to keep up. This is absolutely one of the best aux cores in the entire game, or augments in the entire game, if you're running a general melee or ranged attack build and you don't need a lot of potential. Absolutely something extremely useful and extremely good to have. Very, very good, depending on the build you are trying to run and what you are trying to do. If you're running a build where you're able to get TP from other party members and you don't need to run overdrive, gain TP, or anything like that, this is great to have if you're just trying to do as much damage as possible to like a global nemesis enemy or something like that. So really, really solid augment to have. For special augments, you have Treasure Sensor, which obviously is decently useful for drop rates. It's not going to be useful in combat itself, but if you're just trying to get drop rates, very useful augment to have. But you can also just buy the Canon Incredible Shop Gear for AI if you want to just kind of do that instead. But if you're lazy or just have extra materials or just know you can get materials fast and think it's going to be easier to do it this way, Treasure Sensor is nice to have. Resistance Reducer can also be decently useful if you plan on being a supporter in like RP running for Nemesis or something like that. Otherwise, not really something to worry about too much. The other stuff here, not really that useful at all. So wouldn't really worry about any of the other stuff here. I mean, you can do some memes with Untouchable Dash by sprinting during combat and getting evasion, but I mean, not really useful other than that, right? And then finally, we have the anti-climate augments. Not really going to be the most useful in most situations, especially because you can easily rechange the weather when you're playing in single player. Maybe for like certain missions where you're unable to change the weather, you might have like a niche use for like 1 or 2 of these. But for the most part, this is definitely not going to be something you're going to be worrying about too much. And now that this video is way longer than I anticipated, here are a couple final notes before I just kind of quickly mention the best augments once again. So, once again, potential builds can be very strong since potential is an armor slot for augments. Since potential can be on armor instead of the weapon, it does not have to conflict with some of these strong effects on the weapon, like Appendage Crusher and melee and ranged attack up have to be conflicting with each other since they are competing with slots. Potential doesn't have to worry about that. You can run Appendage Crushers to the max while also running a potential build, which can be very, very nice. Similarly, if you want to run Overdrive Gain TP or Aura Rapid Cooldown, you can run melee and ranged attack builds, which can be really nice to have as well, since they are not competing with slots with melee and ranged attack. So it really just depends on what you want to do. My advice to you is to start with making the build work first. So focus on all the aspects that will make your build work, whether that's getting the Overdrive Gain TP or Rapid Cooldown or stuff like that. Then you can focus on making it strong, because the general multipliers of the game will help you until that point, and then you can focus on increasing your stats and stuff like that, and making your build really, really powerful and able to one-shot enemies. And then finally, you can focus on optimizing the traits of your weapons and gear after that, since you can also upgrade your traits at the AM terminal as well on your weapons and gear. We will probably have a separate guide for how to farm and find the best gear later, since that's a little bit different than what we're doing right now, so look forward to that. Alright, as a final note, here is my list of the best and potentially most useful augments in the game to just consider and focus on crafting. On your weapon, you have Appendage Crushers, one of the absolute best augments in the entire game. Melee attack up and ranged attack up. Attack boost potentially as well, at least 1 or 2 maybe. Secondary cooldown reducer, which is really nice. Weapon attack power up for a few niche cases, depending on if you're using a really strong weapon. And ether attack boost for a few niche cases if you're using a potential build, and you already are targeting an appendage that has a low hardness tier and you don't need the Appendage Crushers. On your armor, Overdrive Gain TP is great as a friendly build as a support character, and just in general if you're running melee attack damage builds. Or a Rapid Cooldown is great if you want to spam arts as much as possible and have another way to get TP. Potential up and Potential Boost are great for TP art damage and just in general, because Potential is one of the best stats in the game. Treasure Sensor is good to farm gear if you really need it as well. These are probably going to be the most important things to focus on if you are trying to get a general setup of all of the best augments in the game so you can do the post-game content. Or just in general as you're playing through the game, a lot of these are really, really useful to focus on as well. This video is nearly 30 minutes and I don't want to take up too much of your time, so once again, thank you all so much for watching and supporting me. I do greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, do be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to ask me any questions in the comment about other potential builds or anything like that, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. And I do hope that you did learn something from watching this video. Thank you all so much for once again for the support. Have a wonderful and blessed day. and I will hopefully see you back here soon.